Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about Commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my fantastic co-host. He can't help but notice that the Final Fantasy card Esper Terra is not actually Esper, it's Dana Roach.
I was actually planning on replaying a few of the Final Fantasy games, but I try to tend to do all of my gaming in the autumn, just because you don't have to worry about fall damage that time of year.
Wow. All right. Well done. It's funny. You said you tend to, and I was like, Final Fantasy 10 too. That's what I heard in my head. So that's where my brain's at today.
And I say that, and the reality is I've actually been replaying Final Fantasy 1. My plan is to go through all of, at least up through 10 in sequence to see how far I can get. So I'm playing Final Fantasy 1 right now.
That is a Blitz baller move, Dana. I really like that idea. That's great. All right, Dana, it's the two of us on today's episode. What are we talking about on this week's show?
We're talking about the Final Fantasy Precons and what we can do to maybe tweak them up a little bit, what cards people are putting in and taking out.
Yes, we are. We're going to take a look at these new Final Fantasy decks, which are really exciting, but then also use some cool features on EDHREC that folks may not know about very well to show you what changes people are making to those Precon decks. And that way, if you're receiving one of those decks for yourself, you can make some quick swaps and get that deck into some spiffy fighting shape. Real quick, though, before we get into our main topic, we've got a couple of shout outs that we want to do. First, EDHREC and Architect have teamed up with FlyQuest Gaming for a not so little something that we can't actually talk about yet, but trust us, you'll want to be there when it becomes more than just a fantasy. Something big is coming. We're very excited. Stay tuned for more details once the event is announced.
And we are thrilled to be teamed up with Dragon Shield, our favorite maker of Magic sleeves and deck products. They just released a new line of dragon-themed sleeves, perfect for Dragons from Tarkir, and they also updated their MTG Card Manager app, which you can find for both iOS and Android by searching for Dragon Shield. MTG Card Manager makes it easy to check prices for trades and to track your Magic collection and its value and stats, and you can instantly translate foreign language cards and find Oracle text and rulings. It's the perfect companion app for Magic. You can manage your cardboard treasures like a dragon. Just go to dragonshield.com/EDHRECast.
Also, you can support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. As a thank you to our patrons, we have tons of perks like our patron-only Discord. We're doing some patron-exclusive content now, too. There are, of course, free ways to show your love for the show. Throw us a like, leave us a review. It all really does add up and mean a lot. So consider hitting that big red button. And for those who do support us on Patreon, again, thank you so much. And a special thank you to our patron shout-out of the week, Drake Domit. Drake, you're the coolest. Thank you so dang much. Okay, Dana, let's get into our topic here. At the time that we're currently recording, the whole Final Fantasy main set is still being previewed, but we do know the contents of the Precons, and they look really exciting to a whole lot of people. So much so that there are already deck lists populating deck building websites for those Precons. So we're even starting to see EDHREC data trickle in about all these decks. I think it's safe to say that the world is really, really dang excited for all the Final Fantasy stuff going on right now. And these decks do look pretty dang awesome.
I mean, that's, I think, indicated by the fact that it's the best-selling set of all time, and it's not even fully spoiled yet.
Right?
I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, I think it is worth saying that, these decks are hard to acquire. These are, if you didn't pre-order them, woof. These are a difficult thing, but they are clearly very popular. Hopefully they get printing upon reprinting so that more folks can eventually get their hands on them, because they do look really, really exciting. And that means, I think, for us here, our purposes here, we kind of want to look at some of the early data that we're seeing for them. That way, when folks do get these decks into their hands, they know what types of swaps they can make to those pre-constructed decks so that they get them into really nice fighting shape for a regular Commander Night. And there are some really cool features that we can go over here, some neat resources, like some ones that are on architect.com and on EDHREC to look over these Precons to see how it is that you can make some changes to them once you get them in your hands.
Well, I think the first thing we'll do here is just look at the decks as they are when you crack open the pack and break out that 99 cards plus a commander. And the first one here we'll look at is the Counter Blitz deck, which is led by Tidus, Yuna's Guardian. That's the Bant deck, and the commander is 3 mana, just green, white, blue, for a 3/3 human warrior. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may move a counter from target creature you control onto a second target creature you control, and it has an ability called Cheer. Whenever one or more creatures you control with counters on them deal combat damage to a player, you may draw a card and proliferate, and do this only once each turn.
As a heads up for the really diehard Final Fantasy folks out there, we know that it's supposed to be pronounced Tidus because Yuna is the moon and Tidus is the sun. Like, we understand. We will apologize. We're going to end up defaulting to Tidus a lot. And I think a lot of players out there in Magic will be doing the same too. So apologies in advance, everyone. So for those listening, we're going to go over to archidect.com. That's ARCHIDEKT.com to check out these lists. Archidect has a really cool feature that can show you all of the past precons in case you want to get a sense of them. And I like the way that they lay deck lists out. It's a great way to get the lay of the land and to see how the deck feels. Plus, Archidect has a really cool playtester feature that is truly just the best in the business. So if you want to try playtesting any of these precon decks, this is a really cool tool to be able to do that so that you can get a sense of how the deck plays and what changes you think that it could use. So we're going to get started here with the Final Fantasy X deck.
Well, and even at a base level, like, this is just useful if you've bought one of these decks, and even if you're going to make a bunch of changes to it, just save yourself the time of entering all the cards you're going to keep. Just clone the deck from one of the precons and then delete the stuff you want to delete and add the stuff you want to add, and just save yourself a bunch of like manual work to get the deck to where it is, because a lot of these cards you're going to keep.
Sage advice right there. Also, there's a really fun thing where you can drag cards from EDHREC into an Archidect deck list, and that saves you a whole lot of typing too, which I'm hugely appreciative of. If you're curious, by the way, all of our personal deck lists are also on archidect.com/EDHRECast, so feel free to check that link in the description, or just once again, that's archidect.com/EDHRECast if you want to see our decks, or if you want to check out these precons. So let's get into it here. Bant +1/+1 counters. And Dana, I don't know about you, but I'm way more impressed by this deck than I thought I would be.
Yeah, I am too. It's like I said, it's this is a thing that's been done before. Even banned +1 counters is not new, but it's encouraging you to hit multiple people to get that trigger. You can do it once each turn, which further encourages you to do it. Like you're getting that trigger, but you want to spread that out among different players. I like that kind of gameplay too, where it's limiting what you can do a little bit, but encouraging you to kind of go a bit of a diverse route. I think it's a neat, interesting commander. I'm a fan of it.
I appreciate it too. It works with different types of counters, which works, of course, for the different sagas, the Aeons, the summons that are in here, which is clever. But then it also allows for really cool reprints like Luminous Broodmoth in here, which will save your creatures by giving them flying counters. It almost sort of feels like an improved version of that new Capenna deck that Matt hates so much that was playing around with keyword counters. He was not really a fan, but I think a lot of people are a fan of this one. That and the fact that the reprints feel so thorough. This is a great piece of work. Well,
and the design's going to let you do odd things too that normally would never come up in a game, but there's going to be a situation at some point in time where someone's going to hit one of your creatures with a stun effect and put 2 stun counters on it, and this will let you move them off that thing that you wanted to swing with onto some other creature that you weren't going to swing with. There's just going to be, because of the way it's worded, there's going to be interesting little counterplays that you just don't ever encounter that you will encounter in this deck.
Yeah. I initially, when I was looking over this list to be like, oh, you know what I think people should be adding in? I would think of a card and then that card was there already. I was ooh, Nesting Grounds would be a really fun land to put in here to move counters around to, oh, it's already there. Oh, okay, well, cool.
Yeah, right.
Walking Ballista was even reprinted in this deck, which is a great +1 counters payoff to remove all those counters to deal a lot of damage. Because when you've got a whole bunch of +1 counters that are being passed around and therefore multiplied and multiplied and multiplied because you have a lot of counter additional adders in there, Walking Ballista is usually lethal by the time that you're seeing it. This is...
I didn't even look to see if it went infinite in this deck, but I feel like it's Walking Ballista. There's probably something that goes infinite with it.
Potentially something, yeah. All right, so we know we like the deck, and for folks who've gotten the deck but who maybe want to make a couple of changes so that it can be in really good shape for your Commander Knight, the feature that we really want to show off here is one that some folks are not as familiar with. It is the Precon Upgrade Guide on EDHREC, edhrec.com/Precon. If you go to the Sets tab down there at the bottom, you won't just look through the most recent sets, but there's actually a Precon Upgrades thing that you can click there too, which will take you to all of the most recent precons that have existed across Magic's history. And when you click on any one of those decks, it will show you the cards that people are most commonly adding to those decks and the cards that they are cutting from those decks. And that's where we'd like to spend a little bit of time in this episode to see what changes are people making to these decks in order to make them all that much better.
Yeah, like you just said, Joey, if you go to that page, you can see the cards that were added and the cards that were cut. And listen, this is something even people like us who have been brewing Commander decks for 20 12, 13, 14 years. There's so many cards. Like, you just forget stuff. And yes, I'm probably not going to take one of these precons and go here and like, you know, go through the list and make all the changes suggested, because I'm going to do things the way that I want to do them. But it's a great way to see the cards like, oh, I forgot this one.
Yes.
You know, I obviously, hey, this deck doesn't have a Swords to Plowshares, so like that's an easy card to add. It's great. But like, I maybe had forgot this other more obscure card that's great in this deck even existed, because it, you know, it came out 7 years ago and I don't have any in their deck and it just has left my memory. It like, even if you are very well established, this is a really useful tool. It's not just for newer players. It's really useful for even veterans.
Yeah. And from this, we can see that with this deck, the cards that people are adding, they're pretty classic, but they're really dang good. And for folks who are maybe super familiar with Final Fantasy, but are just getting their bearings in the world of Magic the Gathering, I think this is a great resource for them to be able to find those cards very easily and make their deck all the better for it. And in this case, some of the cards that we're seeing that players are adding to this Bant +1 counters deck are things like Herald of Secret Streams, to make all of your creatures with +1 counters on them unblockable. Excellent. Yes, Dana, they're adding in, you know, extra removal that the deck might need, like covering their bases with the Swords to Plowshares, very popular removal spell too. But there's also stuff like Kami of Whispered Hopes, which is going to give you mana equal to its power, which you can buff up with all the +1 counters, but it also enhances how many +1 counters you'll be able to give away. So when your commander is doing that thing of passing one +1 counter to another creature, this one will increase how many counters end up on the final product, and therefore probably end up tapping for tons upon tons of mana. These decks are not actually in players' hands just yet, but people are clearly putting some lists online, or they're taking that precon deck, cloning it, as you suggested, Dana, and then making some of their own swaps, and that is the data that we're tracking here. So expect to see also a lot of shifts amongst this data as the decks actually finally release and get even more popular. But this, I think, is a great first starting step, which is exactly what you need when you're getting started with one of these precons.
Yeah, and you know, these decks have gotten so much better in recent years. Like, there's just a lot less work involved in tweaking the deck the way you probably want it than there once was. Like, there's just not a lot of fat in these decks that needs to get cut out. And you know, yeah, there's of course cards that aren't in there that maybe you'd want to add, depending on what your playstyle is, what you want to do with the deck, whatever. But like, it's actually really impressive how good these decks are out of the box nowadays.
Yes, it is. Whenever it comes time to like, all right, what do I cut from these decks? That used to be a really easy conversation. I don't think it's an easy conversation anymore. No. Nowadays, you're just like, dang, this is like near perfect. I don't know that I want to remove any of these.
Or the cards are like obvious, like, oh, well, the Ozolith might be good, but I get why it wasn't in the precon, given it's, you know, $40-some card or whatever it is. So like, yeah, the cards that aren't included, you get why they're not in there as well.
I mean, in that case, I would just say it's not included because it's not a Final Fantasy IP name, right? So
that's true. Yeah, no, good point.
But yeah, I do hope that the Ozolith gets a reprint, because it's a fantastic addition to this deck, and we can see that a lot of players are putting it in there because that saves all those counters in case your creatures get jeopardized. Or we're seeing that a whole bunch of folks are also adding in Tekuthal, who says if you would proliferate, which your commander Tidus does a lot of proliferating, Tekuthal says if you would proliferate twice instead, and it can give itself an indestructible counter, which fits in really nicely with Tidus passing counters around. A lot of great stuff to like here.
Yeah, it's a fun deck with a lot of fun cards, and there's a lot of interesting ways you can tweak it to make it fit the way you want to play it.
Well, and again, not only does this resource show you cards to add, but it also shows you cards that people are most often cutting from the deck, and that can be just as valuable. Like in this case, we see that 2/3 of players, when they're seeing this list, they're cutting out the card Generous Patron, which rewards you if you're putting counters onto other people's creatures that'll help you draw cards, which is a really cool effect, but I think it seems like that hints to us that players want to have counters on their own creatures. They're trying to make their own stuff really buff, rather than trying to play the politics in that way. Or we see that nearly 2/3 of players are also cutting out Tireless Tracker, which can get counters on it and can investigate whenever you do landfall stuff. It's a little bit more of a lands card than it is a +1 counters card, so these are also logical cuts as well. Probably really good flavorful cards with their Final Fantasy printings in those deck lists, but if you are trying to make the deck just a little bit more punchy, then these are good cards to remove.
Well, in not to keep repeating myself, but like, it's also notable when you look at the cards that are being cut, the cards that are being cut are still cards that are like logical to be in the deck.
Yeah.
If you leave that Tireless Tracker or Generous Patron in the deck, those are still perfectly serviceable cards in this list. That's just such an interesting change from 7-8 years ago, where like if you were to look at something like that, it's like, oh yeah, I get why all 15 of those cards on this cards to cut list are being cut, because they don't really interact with what the deck is doing. That's just not how they produce anymore. Like these decks are way more synergistic than they once were.
Yeah. Looks like Lord Jiskel Guado is also being cut from a whole bunch of these, which is, again, sort of an investigate card. Not necessarily on theme. It's a flying creature, would wear counters nicely, but I get why it doesn't necessarily belong. Yeah. A couple of big mana cards are being removed too. Altered Ego and Pull from Tomorrow are both being cut from over half of the lists that people are playing with online right now. One of them can be a clone that is pretty big. The other one can draw you a lot of cards, but Tidus also draws you cards. So it seems like you might be able to lean in a little bit more to what the deck strategy is, rather than having some of these as your backup plans, I would suppose.
Yeah, I think it's just all about tweaking the deck to play more the way you specifically want to play it, versus kind of like things are just generally useful.
So Dana, I have to ask, are there any cards that are not showing up very highly in the stuff that people are playing with for this deck that you think, hey, if you're building this deck, this card needs to be on your radar? Like, we're not going to actually have an official challenge the stats in this episode, because for each deck, we kind of want to challenge the stats. So like, what cards would you say, hey, if you aren't aware of it, try this card out for this deck that isn't showing up in the numbers a whole lot right now?
I don't know if there's anything that really jumped out at me. For example, like I liked that Everflowing Chalice was in this list. It's a 2-mana rock that, because of the proliferate effect on it, suddenly becomes something that taps for 2 mana or 3 mana or 4 mana, just kind of accidentally every turn. You can also, like, if you were to maybe put another mana rock in this deck, I'd be pretty tempted to put in Astral Cornucopia. Would kind of do a similar thing if you were like looking to be making a lot of mana in this deck without having to spend a lot of energy doing it. Like things like that. They're things that incidentally will benefit from proliferate, are stuff that I would probably be a little bit more interested in this deck. But it also has access to green, so there's a lot of land ramp options as well. Again, there's a lot of ways you can take this deck, and I think that's what I liked about this particular one over all of them. This is my favorite, and that's probably why.
Nice. That's a question. You've played a lot with like planeswalkers that are doing proliferate stuff. Are there any planeswalkers that you think maybe are worth attention in this deck, since they haven't put any planeswalkers into any of the Universes Beyond properties before? Or is that maybe a little bit of a red herring, would you say?
In a general sense, I would say it is, except for I would be very tempted to tinker with some Gideons in this list, because a lot of the Gideon planeswalkers turn into creatures, and that would then interface a little bit with Tidus' ability to move counters around on creatures you control. I haven't delved too deeply into it. Like, that was the first thing I thought when I saw that combination of proliferate and moving counters on creatures, was the different Gideon planeswalkers that actually turn into creatures.
Nice. For me, I noticed that the card Damning Verdict is already in the main deck, and that's the board wipe that destroys all creatures that aren't wearing any counters on them. Fits perfectly with the strategy, so I would encourage the card Wave Goodbye is showing up in like 15% or so of the decks that people are playing around with right now. That is a blue sorcery that bounces all creatures that aren't wearing counters. I would say that's probably one of the first ones that you'd want to lean towards, like really prioritize that as an upgrade for this deck. But one other kind of sleeper hit I think could be for this deck is kind of going back to that Call Me of Whispered Hopes. It's a favorite of Matt's. It's Heron Blade Elite, a 3-mana 1/1 human warrior with vigilance that says whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, it gets a +1 counter, and it taps for mana equal to its power. So it starts with just 1, but then as you play humans, it will get bigger and tap for more and more mana. And wouldn't you know it, a lot of these Final Fantasy characters are humans. There are 14 humans already in this deck. So this thing could get a whole bunch more extra counters on it. If you wanted to pass those counters right onto it, it will be able to tap for mana. Or if you're done with the mana production, you can remove its counters to put them elsewhere as you need it. It attacks with vigilance. It provides a lot of mana. I think that would be another kind of fun sleeper hit upgrade, since there are so many humans that this card would benefit from.
That's a really good call in this deck for sure.
Hey, just going to take a quick moment to mention this episode's returning sponsor, Hims. Hims is a comprehensive men's health brand, and if you check their website, you'll see a range of services they offer, from hair regrowth and weight loss to even things like ED treatments. No, not EDH treatments, the other thing. Look, sexual health is the kind of thing that often feels taboo to discuss, and whenever you encounter any health issue, especially one that feels private, it can really shake a person's confidence. But you don't gotta handle it alone, and it just makes sense to approach it like any other medical problem. And it turns out, Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing affordable treatment. And hey, it says here it can even be up to 95% less. Talk about affordable. And they even can do it from the comfort of your couch. Fill out an intake form on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. And if prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/EDHREC. That's HIMS.com/EDHREC for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/EDHREC. The featured products include compounded products which are not approved nor verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
So I think the next one we want to talk about here is the Limit Break deck, which is led by Cloud X-Soldier, so Final Fantasy VII, which is probably my favorite Final Fantasy game, I think. And being able to have Cloud at the top of a Naya deck is very cool. A human soldier mercenary 4/4 with haste for 5 mana, so it's Naya colors and 2. And when Cloud enters, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to it. And whenever Cloud attacks, draw a card for each equipped attacking creature you control. And then if Cloud has power 7 or greater, create 2 treasure tokens. And so this is basically a Naya equipment deck for the most part. Cloud being a 4/4, you hit that 7 threshold basically when you equip, I don't know, almost any piece of equipment for the most part. Like that's pretty easy to hit. So basically you are making treasure really, really often in this deck and probably drawing a lot of cards if you are attacking with other equipped creatures as well.
Reminds me a lot of Boros Akiri as well, who draws you cards every time you attack with equipped creatures. I have to cop to this, Dana. I think when I first saw some of these designs, like Bant +1 counters deck or another equipment deck, to me, I was a little bit worried, I think, because those are territories that are pretty well trodden already within the game of Magic the Gathering. So I was a little bit worried, like, I don't know, are these kind of simple? That maybe it read to me initially as like, I don't know if I'm going to be as excited by those strategies for these. But that said, I'm actually very grateful that this is covering really a really good starter place for like folks who are getting into Magic the Gathering from the IP of Final Fantasy, because I don't want another Doctor Who situation to happen, is I guess what I'll say. I enjoyed the Doctor Who designs, but those decks were very overly complicated, and they lacked a little bit of that synergy, or they were just confusing for folks who knew Doctor Who, but who didn't know Magic very well. And I don't feel that way about these decks at all. Yes, these are some strategies or archetypes that have been very well fleshed out already, but this is doing so in an extremely fun way, and more importantly, an extremely accessible way.
Well, in similar to the Tidus deck here, this is encouraging you to maybe go wide versus like stacking everything up onto one creature. When a Cloud attacks, you draw a card for each equipped creature you control. This isn't a situation where like it wants you to put everything onto Cloud and swing. This is a deck that wants you to equip multiple things and swing to get the most advantage. And like I like that little tweak. It makes the deck play a little bit different than what you usually see in your traditional kind of Boros equipment deck, where it's almost always about stacking everything onto one creature and trying to alpha strike somebody down.
Right. Yes. It doesn't have the Voltron problem.
Yeah.
Where like if your one guy dies, then the rest of the deck just sort of becomes a little bit moot. This is not having that issue at all, which is good because, you know, in Final Fantasy, one of your party members can go down and you can rescue them later. It is not all just one linchpin character. So it's good. It's flavorful and it's fun design. Good on you, Watsy.
And throwing green in is not something you traditionally see in equipment decks as well. So like that adds a little bit of a twist and a flavor and makes it feel fresher than what we normally see from most other equipment decks also.
An important thing about Precons for established Magic players also tends to be like, are the cards worth it too? How are you feeling about the reprints that we're seeing in this deck though?
I mean, the first one that jumped out at me, Clever Concealment had begun to creep upwards in price, and getting a reprint here with some awesome art on it.
It's a good piece of art.
If you had played the game at all, that's fantastic. But like, yeah, that card needed a reprint, and like having it show up here is really, really nice because that's the kind of card, particularly if you're playing in this kind of deck. You know, if you're suiting up a couple creatures, you want to have the option to save them so you don't have to re-equip them all after a board wipe or something. The perfect deck for it, and I'm glad I got a reprint here.
Yeah, I was happy to see the Conqueror's Flail as well. That one really stood out to me.
And again, great deck for it.
Yeah, equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control, so that'll set Cloud right to that 7 power threshold that you want. And as long as this equipment is attached to a creature, your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. 2 mana, and it equips for 2. That gets you right to that threshold that you like, and it protects your combat, which for a deck like this is really important. You do not want to get blown out by removal spells or by fog effects from other players. So this kind of guarantees that you're going to really be a problem that you can really push forward the way that you want to. I gotta say too, Cloud with the haste and auto attach, he's gonna hit like a bus as soon as he arrives on the field. Like, this is not a deck that you will have many breaks when you're playing against it. Even right out of the box, I think that this one's going to be slamming in pretty dang hard.
He'll hit really hard and make you treasure while he's doing it for the next salvo of things you want to get out of the field and hit hard with next turn.
I would almost say, I wonder if the treasure token part might be a little bit of a, not a red herring, but potentially, I think chasing that compared to chasing the idea of drawing cards for each equipped creature, I'd rather focus on getting a lot of equipped creatures to draw a lot of cards rather than trying to focus on getting the treasure tokens. That's just where I'm at. I think that what you really want to do when you're upgrading this deck is try and get as many creatures as you can that have as many equipment as you can so that you can get a lot of cards into your hand. The 2 treasure tokens, those are cool, but more cards, I'm always going to be happy with more cards.
The one thing I liked about that is I made the comment before that like any equipment will probably get you to 7. Well, it's worth noting that none of the swords of, punch and kick get you to 7. They all give you +2/+2. I kind of like that actually because it's encouraging you to run equipment that isn't just all of those swords. Not that the swords aren't great, but like you might be better served running a little bit less frequently seen pieces of equipment because they will buff Cloud up by 3 and you can just incidentally get free treasures and then, not have to stack him up to do that. You can, like you said, you can just kind of ignore that and not kind of take that red herring. I think that's a little bit of an interesting bit of design there.
Yeah, heck yeah. So we like the deck as it is, but of course, when you get it in your hands, you're going to want to make a couple of swaps, make it more of your own. What is it that we're seeing that people are changing around about the deck? When they get this Naya equipment deck, what cards are they adding in?
I mean, the first one that jumps out at me showing up in 30% of decks is Sigarda's Aid. You may cast aura and equipment spells as though they had flash, which is really, really useful. But maybe more importantly, whenever you cast whenever an equipment enters battlefield under your control, you may attach it to target creature you control. So like any equipment come in, you are saving mana on that equip cost. For 1 mana, it's such a useful card in this deck. It's super useful. It's only the 3rd most added card in this deck behind Forge Anew and Shram, but like that's the first one I would probably be jamming into this deck.
Yeah, Forge Anew is especially cool. As long as it's your turn, you can activate equip abilities as though they were instant speed, and you can pay 0 for your first equip cost of your turn. And when it enters the battlefield, it gets you an equipment from your graveyard back to the battlefield. So if your stuff died, don't worry, it's back. And also in combat, if one of your creatures goes unblocked for 0 mana, you can make it a really big problem so that your opponents never have good blocks against you. And SRAM, drawing cards. Like, yeah, these are classics. They're the kind of thing that if you've played against equipment decks, glares somewhere at Matthew Morgan, then you know to be afraid of them, right? Like,
yeah. Now, there are a handful of cards here that are also being cut when you look at this list. And again, none of these are like bad cards necessarily, but the first one that's being taken out of decks here, it looks like, is Hellkite Tyrant. Yeah. Which is a really, really good card. But like it's 6 mana, which is a lot. When it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you win the game if you control 20 or more artifacts. This is a artifact heavy deck, but it's not that artifact heavy.
Yeah.
And unless your opponents are playing heavy artifact decks, this will steal you some mana rocks or a few things, but like it doesn't lean as heavily into what the deck wants to be doing strategically as some other cards do. So I get why this is really easy to cut out in favor of something like Sigarda's Aid that, or something like Forge Anew that absolutely synergize with your strategy.
Yeah, I think as you're making cuts to this deck, you'll end up trying to slim it down on the mana costs. This is a very good creature. It also kind of puts a target onto itself, and paying 6 mana
sure.
to get this, and then to also pay mana to equip it with something, and then to try and swing in. That's all kind of a lot of steps compared to the efficiency of I already have some creatures on the field and maybe an equipment or two on the field by the time I even play my commander in the first place. I think people will probably end up leaning more into that type of tempo. That also kind of explains why we're seeing Summon Kujata is being removed from 72% of the cloud decks that people are tinkering with online as well. That's a really neat enchantment creature saga, but it only sticks around for a limited amount of time. It's expensive compared to the other stuff that we know equipment decks can do and the mana cost efficiency that they're capable of. Makes sense to get rid of some of those higher things so that you can actually spread the love around a little bit more lower to the ground.
Another one I would be looking to cut here if I was building this deck is Secret Rendezvous.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a terrible card necessarily. 3 mana, you and target opponent each draw 3 cards. But like, I don't think you need it in a deck where your commander draws you cards and you have access to, red has pretty good impulse draw these days. Green has pretty decent combat damage based or creature based draw. I don't think you need to settle for cards like Secret Rendezvous in these colors.
Yeah, I'll say I do think Secret Rendezvous is a bad card. I say get rid of it. I don't think it's very good here. It's kind of interesting to see the card advantage things that people are removing from the list, like Furious Rise, which can impulse draw you cards if you have a big creature. Like that makes sense. But also Harmonize is being messed with a little bit here. Some people aren't necessarily happy with it. Some folks are taking Skull Clamp out, which to me feels like a travesty. But I also play a lot of Aristocrats, so I'll leave it to the equipment players to debate about that one. But I feel like it's a good insurance policy. I would love to keep Skull Clamp in here. But again, this is a lot of very early data, so we can't take all of it to heart yet, but they are just good early signal flares. For the most part, it seems like people do have a good sense of like, hey, these cards may or may not work. Even stuff like, I don't know, Heidegger, Shinra's Executive, that one can buff up your creatures for your soldiers. Probably not going to completely neatly fit into the equipment theme here, but it does look like a very fun card. So I guess that's always kind of the thing, right? The flavor versus the efficiency seems like a war that we're going to be fighting as we're seeing what cards people are and are not taking out of universes beyond Precon decks.
Well, so we've talked about the cards that people are adding in general. Are there any cards that you would be adding here, Joey, that aren't showing up on this list?
Man, this is the one where I feel like we would be able to have the most fun. Like when we were brainstorming some ideas about like, oh, what else would we put into this deck? We wrote the most down here, so it's going to be hard to pick just a few. One that really stands out to me is the card Annie Joins Up, which is a Naya enchantment from Outlaws of Thunder Junction that doubles your legendary creature triggers and also does some damage as it enters the battlefield. There are 16 legendary creatures in this deck, and 14 of them have triggered abilities that this would copy. So that's an initial one on my radar. It's not an equipment, but I think it is fun to double up your attack triggers.
Well, and it's a removal spell.
Yeah.
That then sits around after it removes a thing and generates you just kind of free value for the thing you're already doing. That's a really solid card in this deck.
Another one I like is the card Aki Battle Squad, which you won't find if you're searching around in card text for like equipped creatures or searching up the keyword equipment or anything like that. But if you do look up cards that care about modified creatures, Aki Battle Squad will give you extra combat steps when you attack with modified creatures, and equipment do count as modifications. So that might be another one that I would potentially have my eyes on here too. It is 6 mana, but in terms of a top end, that's a good thing to play to like consistently put even more pressure on your opponents. And once again, draw even more cards off of your commander as you're getting more combat steps that this would enable. So that's another that I kind of have on my radar here too. Those are just some of the picks that I'm not seeing in the data here that I would be intrigued to put into this deck. Dana, what about you? Which card stands out that you would want to see in this list?
The first one that jumps out at me is Nettle Cyst.
Oh, great pick.
It's an equipment that gives a creature +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. But what's really useful about that, I mean, not that isn't enough, but it has living weapon. So when it comes into play attached to a 0/0 Phyrexian Germ creature token by default. So even if you don't equip this to Cloud or some other creature, it's already attached to a creature and it's already fulfilling that requirement that Cloud has to have you hit someone with an equipped creature. Nettle Cyst is probably the best example of this that you'd want to put in the deck that is going to really buff up your commander. But like basically any of the equipments that have living weapon that make the germs when they come into play, and there's a bunch of ones that aren't actually using that keyword. We recently had Corey Steel Cutter come out that does a similar thing, comes into play, attaches itself to a token. Any equipment that does that is probably going to be really good in this deck. Not only are the equipment things you can put on Cloud or other creatures and, draw a card when it swings, but it just, like I said, it's already, that condition's been met when it comes into play. There's probably enough of them if you wanted to do something really weird. Like, you could just build a deck entirely around those kind of equipment that come into play attached to a thing.
Yeah, I like that. Because there's a living weapon, there's the new job select ability that they made. Yep. What's the one from that Mirrodin fight? I think, is it for Mirrodin is another one?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of those abilities. Dana, I like that idea. That would be a really fun direction for this, for sure. All right, well, Dana, let's go now from the Final Fantasy VII limit break. Let's go to now Scions and Spellcraft, which is led by Y'shtola Knights Blessed, which I believe is Final Fantasy XIV. Sorry, everyone out there, I did not actually play that one. This is an Esper deck that cares about your non-creature spells. Y'shtola is a 4-mana cat warlock, a 2/4 with vigilance. At the beginning of each end step, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, you draw a card. That's any player lost 4 or more life this turn. So that could include you. You don't draw extra cards if multiple people lose more than 4 life, though. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, Y'shtola also deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. So if you're casting spells, not a bunch of like small low to the ground cantrips, but some pretty hefty spells, you're going to get a very nice chunk of damage on other people out there. Here we are with Scions and Spellcraft. This one is it was previewed very early, so we actually got a big influx of data about Y'shtola. Let's start with this precon though here. I'm not as impressed by this one as the other two, but maybe I just have a proclivity towards Final Fantasy X and 7. I might just be showing my bias. My apologies, everybody. It does look like a very cool commander, though.
Yeah, I like the commander feels pretty open-ended. There's probably a lot of specific ways you could build this, and I think of the 3 we've talked about so far, I think this has the most potential to wind up with one person's Y'shtola deck looking very dissimilar to the next person's Y'shtola deck. And I always like to see that in design where like there's different paths you can take that seem very viable.
Yeah, I like that observation. That makes a lot of sense. So +1 counters and equipment. Maybe that's sort of what I was trying to get at earlier. They feel like strategies that have been very well trodden, so we sort of know their best hits. I don't know what to expect necessarily when I see this commander across the field from me.
Right. Like, conceivably someone could have built this as a vehicle deck. Those vehicles will be non-creature spells when they're cast to deal that damage. That still gives you a way to have bodies in play and make creatures without having to cast creature spells. Or like it could be a deck using a bunch of like instant sorceries to generate tokens, again to create bodies that you can attack with, while you're also fulfilling that condition to cast non-creature spells to deal damage. Those decks will look totally different from one another, but they both are pretty viable build paths here. But as a result of the fact that you could take this so many different directions, this deck is also a little bit less focused than the other 2 we talked about.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair criticism. I do like the spells that are here, and I again like that it's a deck that cares about big spells, not just a lot of the things that we sometimes see with other spellslinger strategies where they're just trying to storm out all at once. This one feels like it has to be a little bit more moderately paced. Which could end up leading towards more of a control strategy, potentially, for instance. But I do appreciate the restraint that was put on design there to make you care about some really big spells. And if anything, that gives me hope that people will put in some of their favorite pet spells into decks like this as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said, being so open-ended gives you a lot of room to find a slot for those pet cards and pet spells and maybe even like pet strategies that you're not going to be able to do with the Cloud deck we looked at or something, because it's got such a specific line of play.
Probably the most fun aspect of this deck, though, are some of the reprints that it's gotten here, like Snuff Out and Lethal Scheme, which have alternate ways to get around their cost. Snuff Out can be cast not by paying the 4 mana for it, but by paying life instead. Or Lethal Scheme, you can convoke, tap your creatures to pay for that instead. Dig Through Time, you can cast a big spell, trigger your commander without actually paying all of that mana. So that's the place that I'm most excited to see further developments and upgrades with this deck, are the other cards that allow you to play big spells without needing all of that mana. But on the subject of upgrades, Dana, that does kind of beg the question, what are people doing to change this deck around? What are the cards that people are, according to the data, adding to the deck the most often?
Yeah, so when you go to EDHREC and go to the Precon upgrade and start digging into it, actually a lot of enchantments are really showing up in the cards added. The first 3 spells listed on this deck are all enchantments that are being added to this list. Ophidian Eye, Curiosity, and Helm of the Ghastward. 3 different blue auras that are going in the list. Ophidian Eye, when a creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Curiosity, same thing. Helm of the Ghastward is in Dimir colors, but as long as enchanted creature is blue, it gets +1/+1 and has whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, draw a card. And if the creature is black, it gets +1/+1 and forces them to discard a card. And as it's a Esper commander, it hits both of those conditions, so you're doing both of those 2 things.
So just like my sinful boy, Sir Conrad the Grim, Y'shtola doesn't make people lose life. Y'shtola does damage. So this is gnarly. Cast a big spell, draw 3 cards because Y'shtola dealt 2 damage to each of your opponents. You could even give Y'shtola things like lifelink, or if you really want to be really messy, infect. I wouldn't recommend going that direction. It won't make you very popular. But the fact that this does damage instead of life loss, that is the kind of thing that I have taken advantage of in my Sir Conrad deck, and I am happy to see that people are playing around with those same types of nonsense here in this deck too.
It's very notable. Those are all 3 quite old auras from when they were printed, and it didn't have the combat damage condition like you see in similar aura effects today, where it wants you to actually have to hit somebody in combat versus just generally dealing damage.
Yeah. There was a propaganda in the original list, so it looks like a lot of folks are matching that up by adding in Ghostly Prison to do the same thing, protecting your life total a bit. I like the inclusion of the card Dismember that's using Phyrexian mana, so you'll pay life instead of mana here, but Y'shtola will gain you back that life. And so it's nice to find a card that will not only allow you to trigger Y'shtola because you cast a spell that has mana cost 3 or greater, but also you will then lose 4 life, which will then trigger Y'shtola's other ability, which is fantastic. Heck, I even like seeing Unwind and Rewind here, which, Dana, I think are counter spells that you're not necessarily a huge fan of. They're the ones that counter spell and then they untap your lands. I feel like you've been a little bit side-eye with them in the past, but I do think they are kind of fun here.
There's a logical reason for them in this deck. Like it's meeting that condition to deal damage to people and gain you life. So yeah, there's a reason this deck wants to run a little bit larger counterspells versus the really efficient ones, because there's a secondary effect for doing so here.
Yeah, and that's just it. It's not that you dislike these cards. It's that you want them to have a good purpose. And they have a good purpose.
Yeah, right. And there is one, absolutely. Yep, for sure.
As for the cards that people are cutting out of the deck, it seems like a lot of the flavor stuff is maybe not matching up quite. Like Crux of Fate having been in this deck at all, the one that either destroys all dragons or all non-dragons, I'm sure it's a very important Final Fantasy XIV moment. It is not a very important moment to me. So yes, I don't think this is the board wipe that you want for this deck. Cut it to make room for some other better board wipe instead, for sure.
Yeah, and Bastion of Remembrance is a great card if you're doing Aristocrats kind of stuff. But if you're not, probably isn't doing you a lot of good here. So like, fantastic card, and you could take the deck that direction. But if you're not, it's probably not helping you at all.
Yeah, Sage's New Liths is getting cut from 71% of these Y'shtola Precons as well. That is a blue equipment job select. This is an equipment deck. It's nifty. It's a cool looking card, but it isn't necessarily the thing that we want here. I'm even like Tome of Legends is being cut from half of the deck so far too. And Tome of Legends is actually a pet card of mine. I really, really like that card. It is not necessary in this deck. You're in blue. You have more efficient ways of drawing cards at a better rate than Tome of Legends will provide you. Tome of Legends is very good in the right deck. This just isn't it. So yeah, players are on the right track cutting a whole bunch of these for sure.
They're also cutting out Ardbert, Warrior of Darkness. And I just want to throw a little note out there. I understand why you're cutting it out, but if you're a patron supporter, we just put a deck tech up that I recorded about Ardbert. So check that out if you're a supporter.
Heck yeah.
Oops, all Orzhov. Every spell on the deck is Orzhov.
That's really cool. I like that idea a whole lot, Dana. That's very neat. Yeah. Well, I like a lot of the data that I'm seeing here about what players are tinkering with from, this base starting precon and how they would make changes. However, there's one other thing that I want to throw out here. A very, very small number of players are adding in the spell Irenicus's Vile Duplication, which is a very interesting sorcery that gives you a copy of target creature you control, except the copy has flying and the copy isn't legendary. I like that spell a lot. Like, that is to me the place that I would want to take this deck. And so I'm going to also throw in one other thing here. Not just should you maybe take a look at EDHRECast's Vile Duplication to get even more copies of your commander and trigger your commander while you're doing it, I would also suggest the card Quantum Misalignment, which is a 5-mana version of a similar effect, but it also has Rebound. So on your next turn, it will do it again. So you will get those cast triggers and you'll get even more Y'shtolas. You'll probably have to have at least a little bit of counter magic in order to protect your Y'shtola army that you're making, but nothing sounds more fun to me for this deck than using spells to create even more of these commanders, because then it just feeds right into itself, and I think it will really supercharge the strategy a lot when you're getting all of those commanders and extra triggers because they're not legendary copies. I'm probably a little bit too excited about this idea, Dana, so maybe you should take the microphone away from me.
Well, yeah, the spell you're casting is doing damage to people to make another copy of the commander, so the next time you do it, it's going to deal twice as much as you make more copy. Like, it just feeds back on itself. Similarly, you have things like Vesuvan Duplimancy that makes a non-legendary copy of the creature that is being targeted. And if you're running a bunch of those, like Ophidian Eye, Curiosity, Helm of the Gastlord-esque enchantments, and you probably would have to have more than just the 3. You'd want to like probably 10, 12, 14 of them to make it worthwhile. Same thing. That can get out of control in a hurry if that's the strategy you're going with.
Yeah, it just sounds so gross, because then the more of them you have, the sooner you'll make everyone lose 4 life, and then you'll trigger all of them to draw that. Like, it's pretty gross. It's pretty gross. Yeah, okay, I can see why people like this so much. Maybe I do like Final Fantasy XIV after all. That's what I've learned today. Okay, well, that will take us to our final deck list. We move to the last one, Revival Trance, led by Terra, Herald of Hope. And this is a Mardu graveyard deck. So if I was excited by previous stuff, you'd think it's graveyards. I'm going to be even more excited by it now. So this deck, the Revival Trance deck, is led by Terra, Herald of Hope, a 3-mana Mardu human wizard warrior 3/3 who says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you mill 2 cards, and then Terra gains flying until end of turn. Makes it easier to hit people, which is convenient because whenever Terra deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2 mana. When you do, return target creature card with power 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Kind of invoking a little bit of the past, like Aleshas that we've seen over the years that will bring some of your smaller creatures back out of the graveyard, but it's also filling the graveyard as you're doing that so that you can find more of those party members to bring back into the fray with you. Dana, Mardu graveyards, how are we feeling about this Final Fantasy Precon deck?
This one is probably my least favorite of the 4. At the beginning of combat, your commander's gaining the evasion that it needs to punch through to deal combat damage, to trigger the ability to bring the creature back that you just milled. Like, everything is in one little package. It feels a little too self-contained for me.
Dana, I understand that you don't like it. However, it does have Rise of the Dark Realms and Reanimate.
Fair.
Therefore, it is the best deck ever because those are graveyard revival spells, and I'm not biased. What are you talking about?
I am not at all surprised that you are a big fan of this deck, Joey. It does a lot of Joey things for sure.
It does a lot of Joey things. Well, and there's interesting stuff going on here too. There's a card called Warring Triad, for instance, which can give you mana and mill you. And I'm like, yes, please. Always, all of the days. It is doing a lot of that aristocracy type of stuff with the Morbid Opportunist, the Pitiless Plunder, drawing you cards or making you treasures as your stuff is dying. And no single one of your creatures feels like it is indispensable. Rather, like these are things that can constantly attack and come back and attack and come back. And I don't know, it seems to evoke a little bit of the play patterns that I've seen in my own Baracos Folk Hero list, for instance, where it is actually kind of okay for those creatures to go because I know how easily to get them right back. And that sustain means that it's always a player in the game, and it doesn't have that problem that some aggro decks can sometimes fall into, where if they stumble, they'll stumble really hard and it's hard to claw back in. This one doesn't have that problem, and that's why I actually do find myself pretty partial to it.
Well, and the cap on the creatures being power 3 or less is actually a nice little limitation. You're not just throwing as many like giant 7/7s in here that you're reanimating for next to nothing. You have to be selective and like have so why is this creature worth reanimating? What thing is it going to be doing? You have to like be a little bit picky. So yeah, you still have to have a plan because of that. You have to like be selective about what creatures you're picking, and I do actually like that portion of it for sure.
I will say I am pretty mad about the card Espers to Magicite in the deck, though. This one is mean and bad and wrong, and how dare they? It is a 4-mana instant exile each opponent's graveyard. That alone is bad. No, Wizards, how dare you? But then also when you do, you choose up to one target creature card that was exiled this way, and you make a token of that card, except that token is also an artifact and loses all other card types. So you're stealing my stuff, and it's not even the right stuff. Wizards, you're not supposed to exile my graveyard. How dare you?
Also, it's, once again, Espers in a Mardu deck. It should just be Mardus to Magicite, but I guess that wouldn't make sense in the context of the game. But yes, I don't like seeing Espers in a non-Esper deck for sure.
Yeah, got to put that card into like a Shroom deck or a net deck immediately.
Right, exactly.
Actually, no, don't. It exiles graveyards. Don't put this card in decks. I'm mad about it.
So I guess once again, we can head over to EDHREC and see what cards people are adding to this list right off the top. And Joey, as if previewed by you, Alesha, Who Laughs at Fate, showing up as the first card being added.
Yeah.
At the beginning of your end step, if you attack this turn, return target creature with mana value less than or equal to Alesha's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So just a second way to get that effect, or a backup way to get that effect if your commander isn't available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Alesha, like those pages in general, are going to be a really good resource for you to look at when you are upgrading this deck as well. Not just the Precon page here to see what other players are doing, but if you take a look at the Alesha pages and things like that, you'll find some really nice stuff to play with. Looks like people are also adding in Karmic Guide, which is a nice revival spell that can get you back even bigger stuff. It itself has 2 power, but when it hits the field, it will return another creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this can be a way of using your commander's abilities to get back a tiny creature that will also get you back a big creature. So that's definitely a classic of the genre too, as well as some other stuff we're seeing that people are using to fill up their graveyard. Buried Alive to put some creatures directly from their deck into the graveyard. Faithless Looting, a way to just loot some cards right into your graveyard, draw and discard, and it's got flashback. Fill up the yard, which your commander will do, but sometimes you need a little bit of help, or you've got some cards in your hand that you would rather aren't there because your commander will get them back for even less mana. Classics of the genre all, but happy to see that players have the right sense of where to go with what this commander can do.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically a perfect Faithless Looting deck. Like, all the things you want are right there on that card. I understand why that's going in this list for sure.
I'll also shout out real quick to 2-mana 2/1 creatures that are both being added to the list a lot. Accursed Marauder and Selfless Spirit. Accursed Marauder is really annoying. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a non-token creature. If your commander is repeatedly getting that back to remove your opponent's important stuff, because it doesn't hit their tokens, so they have to sacrifice something that matters, and then your commander can do it again later. And Selfless Spirit, which can give your stuff indestructible by sacrificing itself. These are, again, fantastic targets to see that people are putting into the decks so that they can lock down their opponent's position or secure themselves for the later parts of the game too, and make sure that they're actually going to continue putting pressure onto their opposition. So just other things that are, like, again, a little bit classics of the genre, but like, yeah, there's a reason that people are defaulting to these, and I'm personally very happy to see that this is the direction that people are going, in addition to all the other fantastic spells that they're putting into this deck.
Well, and like you pointed out, those are spells those are creatures that have the power that makes them recurable with the commander's ability. When you go look at the cards that are being cut, you're seeing cards that don't qualify for that. You're seeing cards like Combustible Gear Hulk and Ruin Grinder being taken out because their power and toughness makes them one-off uses. And people building this deck want to be able to cast the same thing repeatedly and have anything that winds up in their graveyard being something that they can bring back depending on what they need most.
Yeah, I wish Ruin Grinder was good. That's the one that, like, when it dies, you wheel. And, like, that sounds neat, but it gives people options in a way that, like, I don't know. It's trying to cover a lot of bases, and unfortunately, I think it ends up being the jack of all trades, but master of none situation with that card. I wish I liked it more than I do. It doesn't make as much sense to me in this deck either. It's gone, and that's a good thing. And just going down the list, it's, Angel of Ruin, similarly. It's just, like, too large of a creature to be brought back. Archfiend of Depravity. Great card as well. Just not what people want to be doing in this deck. It seems like they want to be just playing those smaller, efficient, but powerful creatures and doing it every single turn. I think potentially some folks might look over some of these and notice that, like, yeah, some bigger creatures are being cut. Well, in that case, how is this deck going to win? Because you can't nickel and dime to end the game. You do need to have some, like, proper win conditions, and, like, presumably you need some actual chonky damage in order for that to happen, right? Don't worry, Aristocrats is going to be your best friend. Nickel and diming and Death by 1,000 Cuts does actually get there, I promise.
Yes.
I have far too much experience with that. So, like, I think the deck will be okay without some of these. as it turns out, a creature that has like 5 power or so can be a little bit more of a liability, because what you need is more of the bodies to provide a wider spread of pressure instead of just an individual thing.
Well, there's also just in the base version of the deck, there's cards like Rise of the Dark Realms that you don't care if the creatures are large, if they're someone else's. I'm just going to take those large creatures back and not have to worry about winning with my small ones.
Dana, the only thing worse than someone exiling my graveyards is someone rising of the Dark Realms and taking all of my own stuff from my graveyard.
Absolutely.
But what can I say? I play Rise of the Dark Realms. I can't be mad at it. I would be a hypocrite if I was mad at it. So for fair play, all.
So having looked at the cards that other people are adding, Joey, are there any ones that you yourself would add to this list that isn't showing up so far on this EDHREC page?
Yeah, so there's an interesting commonality that I found myself gravitating towards across all of these Final Fantasy decks, and it is just small things that they each seem to have. For instance, a large presence of humans, because a lot of the characters in Final Fantasy are humans. So that's why I went with like a Heronblade Elite in the +1 counters deck. Or a lot of legendary creatures. Like, we're getting so many legends with this set. So many named characters, which does affect how we do play Magic a little bit. We've had whole episodes about the influx and flood of legendary creatures that are being provided to the game, which isn't an issue, but it does kind of change some of the strategies of your deck here and there when you're doing things like cloning.
For sure.
In this case, with this deck, I am also leaning into, there are a lot of legendary creatures in this list. So the card that I would personally want to add is Ratadrabik of Urborg, a 4-mana 3/3 zombie wizard with Vigilance and Ward 2. It gives your other zombies Vigilance, and the way that you get zombies is because whenever another legendary creature you control dies, you create a token that is a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and it's a 2/2 black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. If I'm counting right, there are either 18 or 19 legendary creatures in this deck for Ratadrabik to take advantage of. Board insurance, if someone tries to destroy everything, all of your legendary creatures, of which you have many, you'll leave behind some stuff, and you can get those creatures back from the graveyard later, and they will get along happily with their non-legendary zombie copy. This is a card that I would definitely gravitate towards that doesn't seem to be on anyone's radar just yet, that I really do think could actually make Terra even more supercharged than it was before.
Yeah, that is so much value in this deck. I have one kind of strange one here. So if you look at this list, one thing that's not readily apparent right away, there are no enchantments in it.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Maybe you want to add some, maybe you don't, but let's say you don't, or let's say you only add back in 1 or 2. I'm a fan of the card Patrician Scorn. 3 and a white, it's an instant, and it says destroy all enchantments. But even better, if you played another white spell this turn, you can play Patrician Scorn without paying its mana cost. So really often it's just a free way to destroy all enchantments, and if you don't have any, or only have 1 or 2, that's even better. You're just wiping the board of enchantments and not hitting yourself. I have an equipment deck where I run this, where I have 0 enchantments in the deck, and it almost always generates a crazy amount of value. Just accidentally in this deck, it might wind up being a cool card because it was just brewed up with no enchantments.
I like that. You're paying attention not just to what the deck does, but also to the negative space of the deck. That's a crazy important part of deck building. Knowing what your deck doesn't do so that you can play around that and sort of use your own counterbalances. Dana, I think that's really, really wise, even if I'll be mad at you that you are going to destroy all my enchantments when you do this. So those were the 4 Final Fantasy Precon decks. Again, if you want to take a look at any or all of those, you can go over to Archidect and check out their Precon page to see all of the Precons that are there. And if you are looking for the ways that people are upgrading, you want to see some of those cards yourself, go over to EDHREC, look at that Sets tab at the bottom of that. You're going to see the Precon upgrade guide, or you could just go edhrec.com/Precon. That'll show you all of the Precon pages that they have there and show you the data of what people are taking out of those decks and what they're putting into those decks. We covered a lot of the spells and the creatures. We didn't pay as much attention to the mana bases, but there is information for how people are upgrading the mana bases too. Maybe we'll do a whole different video about upgrading Precon mana bases at a later time. But yeah, all those resources are going to be available for you. edhrec.com/Precon and the Archidect Precon page are really valuable resources if you just got one of these Precons and you're looking to jump them up even further.
Yeah, all we've talked about here today for this last hour are these 4 Precons. The full set itself is not even entirely spoiled yet. There's a lot more cards that are going to be coming out, which is good because Matt is probably the biggest Final Fantasy homer among all of us, and he isn't here to talk about this today, so we need to leave some Final Fantasy stuff for Matt to just go bonkers over.
Don't worry, everyone. He'll be back talking about Final Fantasy for 1 or 3 or 30 episodes. Dana, I thought that he couldn't have been more excited when it was the Lord of the Rings stuff that came out and when he was looking all over like those precons. But he has been feral about Final Fantasy, which is delightful to see. I'm so happy to see all the joy that this set is bringing to people.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest selling set so far. We still have Marvel stuff to come, so who knows what that will wind up doing as well. But yeah, I mean, like, a lot of people really love this. Matt is super hyped. Between the Lord of the Rings and Final Fantasy, I think if they released a Kansas City Chiefs Universe Beyond set, that would break his brain.
Yeah, probably.
All of his favorite things on Magic cards at once.
Oh no, Matt, save it for the secret layer.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dana, this has been great. Listeners out there, I hope you've enjoyed going over these precons. Again, these resources can be really important for folks to find a way to upgrade those decks, make it more their own, or find stuff that will get it into better shape so that when you actually go sit down with one of these at Commander Night, you know exactly how it is that you're going to take that game down. And hopefully you get to live in some of the fun with some of your favorite characters here too. I want to hear from folks. Which of these decks is their favorite, and whether that ends up with, is it also their favorite Final Fantasy game or not? You'll definitely hear more content from us in the future about other Final Fantasy stuff from the main set that's coming out. And Dana, as you hinted, we've got some Patreon exclusive stuff over at patreon.com/EDHRECast that you and Matt have been brewing some new decks, and you're going into some of those, which do feature Final Fantasy characters. So yeah, a lot of brewing and stuff on the horizon. But with that said, Dana, right now, I think we got to call this episode to a close. So if our listeners want to get in touch with us online, where can they find you, buddy?
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC. You can find all of us at patreon.com/EDHRECast. And if you want to get some EDHRECast custom sleeves, just go to dragonshield.com/EDHRECast and pick up something featuring us today.
And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz. And you can find the cast online at EDHRECast. Plus, if you have a question for us or perhaps a challenge the stat submission that you'd like to let us know about, you can contact us at EDHRECast@gmail.com. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with even more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.